up is I'm actually speaking at this event. I believe Ken as well. We're talking about Azure, more cloud stuff at that event. I'll be talking about using cloud and mobile development at that event. So it's a little bit more pricey, but if you want to go to a more professional level conference, definitely do check that out. They keep mentioning about the Montreal Jazz Festival, so I'm thinking that's going to be a good time for us. So definitely do check that out. Okay, so let me walk through the schedule. So we've got a bit of a change on the schedule. We don't have our second speaker, so what we're going to do is basically, Jeff has agreed to kind of put more content into his talk. So hopefully by about 10:30 we can kind of wrap up, give you guys a bit of break, because we got plenty of coffee, water, and food down there. You saw all the food, so please eat that up. And if you haven't visited the swag table and picked up a shirt, do so.
So yeah, I got that little change there that I'm going to go a little longer, which is fine. I have lots of boring stuff to add to it, so you guys will be fine. When I was putting this talk together, I was asked kind of what I was going to talk about. And so on the thing it says I was going to talk about less, but I'm like, I only had 45 minutes, I didn't have time, but now I guess I could have. So anyone, here, let's do this, because when I say everyone put their hands up, they do something not. So everyone start their hands up. Come on, come on. It's way easier this way, right? Put your hands down if you don't do web at all. Oh, perfect. You guys, if you put your hands down, you might as well leave for the next little bit. So I thought there'd be more. So you guys put your hands down. That's good. I guess I should just let that go, see how long you for. So maybe I didn't have to do this, but I tried to figure out, okay, there's going to be people in this room that don't do web. So I want them to get something out of it. So I'm like, okay, let's try to add some things in there that are more foundational, that aren't necessarily all web. So there'll be a lot of web stuff in here, but I'm going to try to sprinkle in some things that'll be useful for the non-web people. I don't like you because you're not a web person, but I'll try to do that anyways. So I kind of go a little off topic first and see if this works. So part of the things we do is, we write code. Well, we have this idea of life is short and all these great things. But Seneca, kind of this philosophy. I bet you guys didn't expect some philosophy at 9 a.m. this morning or 9:15, whatever. But the idea is that like life isn't that short. We spend lots of time. We just spend so much time doing stuff that doesn't matter. And I'm so guilty of it. Lori was busting my chops. People who don't know Lori, Lori's in the back there. That I don't do enough things. I don't write. It's because I'm too busy doing nothing. So people who've read about Stephen Pressfield as an author, he wrote Legend of Bagger Vance. The idea of, with this thing and we want to do something, we get pulled way back to our base. Base is whether it's, I don't know, watching Game of Thrones or playing video games. It's this thing that tells us what we're going to do is not that good anyways. There's better people out there doing this. Why waste my time trying to share information, write, or commit to open source? So we have all these things telling us to not do those things. And we rationalize it as, there's smarter people out there or whatever that is. But in the end, it's this inner struggle that's just like making you always come back to your base. So the interesting thing as software developers is the time wasting we spend most have been created by ourselves. So all these things are software that we waste lots of time on. I mean, we get lots of valuable things from them. We do, like Twitter can be valuable. Facebook can be valuable if you want to see pictures of Lori's dog being cute, right? But Netflix, right? Like I'm so guilty of that. Like you just see a really good show, it's so good quality. It's like I can't miss it. This is so important because when you're 7 years old and you're thinking of the things you accomplish in your life, like I'm so glad I watched all of Breaking Bad. I am, but set discussion. So the idea of I am not perfect. I'm really making sure that is apparent. Is that you want to like force yourself through it. It is beneficial. You feel great about it. You commit to open source, or you write a post. You hit that publish thing. Yes, you're a little scared. You're a little like, oh my goodness, they're gonna find out I'm a fake. They're gonna find out I don't know anything. I'm the phony syndrome, imposter syndrome, right? But it's like you just gotta do it, and it's not easy. People say just do it, like Nike, yay. But it's not easy because you have all these things telling you not to do that. Coming to this event, like no one's making you come to this. This is a good thing. But like creating something is also good. So there's plenty of things you can do. Contribute an open source project. There's not that many JavaScript ones, so you can definitely create one of those. There's only about 6 million of them. But you can contribute to one, right? So you don't have to create a new one. You can just contribute to one. You can write a blog. I write one once every 3 months, so that's really timely. Read. How many people have read a software book in the last 2 months? Yes, I know. We're sad, aren't we? It's like there's so much information for there's no field in the world that has as many people sharing their ideas for free, and we still don't do it because breaking. I want to see what Walter White did in season 4, episode 2. So yeah, back to the website, back to the topic. Okay, so let's start with that. So the web is tricky. There's frameworks, a million libraries. How do you pick the right thing? You're probably not going to pick the right thing. Like my talk's on React, but React might not be the right thing. So if you're going to invest that time, don't be so invested in a particular framework or paradigm. Because if it's not the right thing, or you find out that people are moving away from it, you've kind of invested yourself in something that may not scale in your career. Or enjoyment. For people who do, I always shit out web forms. I guess speaking out web forms. For people who do that, if you were still doing it all day, every day, for the last 15 years, I don't think you are doing it. You've given up a long time ago. I almost left the industry because of that. It's horrendous. So try not to invest yourself all in one thing, even if it sounds amazing, because it's gonna fade. So again, need time. Don't overinvest. The mullets will come back. That's a pretty nice one. So I wasn't balding, I would definitely grow one. Although I guess I can cover the bald spot, right? So that's kind of cool. So anyone heard of React? Anyone not heard of React? There you go. I was going to say, can I see you put your hand up the first time? So you better put your hand up for one of them, because you have to be one of the two. It's a binary decision. So people have heard of it. It's probably, I'm not going to go too much into, when I do talks, I try not to go too much to what the website's going to tell you when you go there. It's going to tell you, here's the thing, here's how to write your first component. We'll do a little of that. But we're going to try and get into the why you go a certain path, or maybe some good paradigms to use that aren't necessarily React specific. I'll try my best to do that. So there's many reasons, again, there's many libraries out there. I liked it. So I've done a talk, people maybe have seen me do a talk on this, I did a talk to the London one a few months ago. So it won't be too repetitive from that. It's it's good, it's composed of all these great things, and you can go to the website, it's going to tell you that. So I'm not telling you anything different here. But if you haven't gone to the website, hopefully this allows you to check it out. There's other things that are good too. But interesting things can be incremental. So I work in a company that has a large legacy app. And they're working to give me the keys to the car to rewrite everything. Made me sad, but they wouldn't. So I had to figure a way to I want to add new things to this existing thing. How do I do that? And I looked at the other guys. I looked at Angular, I looked at Ember, all those things. And I found there was a big thing I had to move in to fit into this spot. It was just too much. So I had to find something that fit, and it actually worked out quite well that this was available. I didn't want to use Knockout for people who've used Knockout. Anyone used Knockout.js before? Yeah, we got some web people. I like it. Good. Knockout was great because the Sport IE6 was fantastic at the time, but it definitely had its limitations. The good thing I like about React was, so the other day is I rarely have to go to Stack Overflow to find issues now. How do I do this thing? It's rare that I have to do that. So it's very simple. It's just the view layer of your app. So look at some code for us. Now, Pete Hunt, who was one of the original creators, he was on the Instagram team that first made Instagram a full React web app. He kind of was like the original guy. If you see some of the early React talks, it's mostly Pete Hunt. And the problem with React now, because you have things like Ember. So Ember has this idea where they're gonna make the food for you. They're gonna set the table. You're gonna come in. It's gonna be ready for you to start writing code. The problem with React, and also its advantage too, is that there's lots of choices to make, and some of them can be a little daunting. So you can find some of the people and like all the things to just start building your apps and all the pipelines and the new JavaScript library. It's going to do this for you. It can become a little worrisome at times because there's so much. So what's happened is people have gone like too many things, and then he said, let's pull back a bit. Let's kind of break it down to smaller things. So you have React itself. That's one thing. It's kind of a big change. If you're coming from a different framework or something, it's a big change in itself. They've never used NPM before. Does everyone have NPM? Everyone used NPM? Yes? Everyone not used NPM? I'm losing hands already. I'm starting to lose hands. We're kind of in the middle. So that's a no. It's like NuGet for the .NET people, or so allows you dependency management, all that kind of thing. So that stuff is new for some people. Never done it before. It's another thing. And when you're doing these things, like for me, this is all like, oh, that's simple. Because I know it all now. I've gone through the struggle. I've gone through the research and all that stuff. But it starts adding up, and you have a bundler. Oh, I got to bundle all these JavaScript files together. I have to make sure, because the web doesn't have modules, I have to make sure I get nice small, reusable JavaScript. I need a bundler to put this all together. And then I have my CSS or my less, like all these things. And you have ECMAScript 6, which is ECMAScript is the JavaScript standard for people who don't know. And they define what's going to be like in the next version of JavaScript and everything. So you have that stuff, and all people are writing examples in it. People are like, what are these weird things? Why is there an arrow in my JavaScript? All these weird kind of questions. You have Flux and Redux. If you've heard React, you've probably heard Flux before. Redux is the new thing if you're going to do that pattern. I'm not going to talk about that. Again, I thought I had limited time. I guess I didn't. Then you have other things that are a little kind of inside baseball, kind of things that within the React community people are dealing with. So inline styles. I know some people out there are like, what? Why would you do that? Certain times it makes sense. There's other strategies. CSS, I hate it. I was struggling with it for about 2 hours last night. That's why I really hate it. It's really fresh. The scars, the wounds are open and fresh right now. I was preparing last night a little bit, adding a little touch-ups, and then you have server rendering. So server rendering, server rendering is a thing that people thought it would make things faster. But there's kind of, people are coming with strategies now that if you can do things faster as a client-side renderer even. There's some really cool things happening out there that making that go away. The big reason why you want server rendering is if you're making an app that needs search engine optimization. Google's getting better at doing the single page app stuff, but it's still not ideal from a search engine optimization point of view. So Babel is the ES6 thing. So we'll talk a little bit about this because I'm one of those bad people who write my examples and write my code with the new ECMAScript standard. So what Babel does is, you probably have to deal with older browsers. You're not dealing with the newest version of Chrome. And actually the newest, even the Node version doesn't have all the new ECMAScript stuff, ECMAS standards. So what that does, it gives you the future of JavaScript as it's coming, and it compiles it down to a JavaScript that is going to work in your browser, going to work in your version of Node, all those things. It lets you do, look, there's lots still scope in JavaScript. Not really, but kind of. From a Babel perspective, it does. It enforces it. So things like, you don't have to declare all your variables at the top anymore because that's what it does anyways. It still does it, but at least Babel will kind of warn you that you're doing it. And so you'll get errors if you try and reassign a constant. Now people who think of constants are thinking it's a thing that can't change. Well, JavaScript, it can't change. Constant is constant. And the reason is, if you're using a primitive, it's constant. You can't reassign that. So you can't reassign it, that's all it means. So if you have an object called person, and you assign a new person to that const person, if you assign that, you can say person.name equals this still. Okay? So it's not what you might think a constant is. Other thing is ECMAScript modules. So people see modules before. So you may have seen, if you've seen stuff before, there's a common JS thing where You did a require, and you'll see some of those in the code I show later. But it allows you to kind of separate. So this is your math.js file. So you have this function you're exporting. So you can start having private functions and private things inside your JavaScript file. And then you just say, say which things you want to actually export. And so that's your, so if you have the other file, then you have, okay, from that libmath.js file, I want to use this function and that function. Start breaking things up. So if some of you are doing this already today, are people using, anyone using Babel in here? Oh, perfect. Great. So you guys are like, what is this guy talking about? So Babel, again, I'm in this like React universe. So all this stuff is like, oh yeah, of course. But if you guys aren't doing it, it's going to be like, why are you doing this? Who cares? It's just imports and exports. My JavaScript framework handles this in some way. But this, the thing is, again, this is about being timeless. So this has nothing to do with React. We're leveraging it in React. Like, we leverage it, but it has nothing to do with it. It's all about modules, exporting and importing modules. And it compiles it down to regular JavaScript, so you can use it anywhere. So a framework you can use it on. So there's cool things, arrow functions for the .NET people, lambdas, right? The good thing about this is, that was actually a pun, I didn't realize it. So this keyword, which is like, I don't know, makes a lot of people cry because it's hurt them in some way. If you've done web front end enough, unless you're really smart, which I'm not, that has hurt you before. And so the interesting thing, it kind of fixes it. So you can just say this name now, and it works. You don't have to worry about it. Handles it for you. It's kind of cool. I don't use this much anymore. Yeah. Hard not to say this. Makes sense. Some little things, right? So if you have a property and the variable you're assigning it to it are the same name, instead of saying handler. I know it's a game changer and everything. It's going to change your whole life. The flowers will smell nicer, the food will taste sweeter. And then things like that, two strings. So before you say function, blah, 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 just a shorter syntax. And then you computed properties. Some interesting things that are common you can use today. Most of it's not a big deal. So the other one is templates. So everyone loves string concatenation, it's so much fun. So forever JavaScript, you do the plus, variable, plus, quotes, all that fun stuff. So they fixed that. They put a lot easier to read this now. Less simpler to work with. Some magic dollar signs. For the Angular people, look at dollar sign. Perfect. See? Good tie-in. So every app has a starting point. So most Reacts are kind of the idea of a single page app. They don't have to be. They can just be a component you render to a DOM element. So for this looks weird. If you haven't seen React, it's gonna look weird, I bet. To me, it looks so normal. Right, Mark? Like Mark works to me. Yeah, that's fine.
That makes total sense.
Totally fine. Like I can't think what it looks like to be someone who's never seen it before and be like, that looks perfectly normal. So the imports, we saw the imports already. So the imports are just, so these are React and React DOM, those are just libraries from React. I don't want to delve too into that stuff because a lot of that stuff is you can just go to the website and learn the basic tutorial. I'm not going to help you with that really because you're going to forget most of what I say today, I bet. You have the import, so there's a folder relative to this thing that's in the source folder, that's the app, and that's your app. So this is a function. This is JSX. So people have never seen JSX before. It looks like, so it's basically, it's kind of like a template, but it isn't because these are actually JavaScript functions. It's just like a nice way to write it for you to kind of look like the semantic web in a way. So this is your app. This is where your whole app will exist. In general, you're probably not going to have all the data from your app in a local file, but in general, that's basically what it is. And you pass things down through props, and we can talk about it a little more. And then you have to render, you just pick your DOM element and render it. So again, if you have a legacy app, and you just want to say, I want this part of my screen to not be this old crap anymore. Create a div tag, target to that. Very small, very basic. You don't have to know about Flux and routing and all the and what data access you're going to use. It doesn't. You don't have to worry about that. You can start small. This might be small for some people in the back. Can you guys see that back there? Yeah, okay. Looks like HTML, right? If you want to see it. A lot of templates have all these like weird syntax. You have to get used to. You have to learn. It takes time. How do you do a loop in this template engine? In React, it's called the for each or a for, or even better, a map. Right. So there's some weird things, of course, because it's JavaScript. You can't have the word class. That means something. So you don't have the words. So you have to use class name, which is kind of odd. But if you use a good IDE like WebStorm, I think Sublime does it too. When you are in a JSX area or JS file and you type in class, it'll give you a class name. It'll put quotes in for you. You don't have to worry about it. And when you're in dev mode and stuff, or if you have half-decent linting, and we'll talk about linting in a bit. If you have a half-decent linter, it's going to catch that stuff for you. Say you're using class, you should be using class name. Things get taken care of. So you can start easy, not have to worry about all these things. Again, you'll have to look things up a bit, and there's lots of resources for that. Trying to think of anything interesting to talk about again, you have your basic semantic tags. This probably looks weird to you guys, right? That weird CSS naming. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's very verbose, but it's actually good. So again, this is the structure of your app, your initial app thing. We're gonna see the app. You have this container, and you have a H4 tag, and you have an input box. So with input boxes, it's components, whatever the value is, and then your on-change function, like basic things. Right? So we'll browse around the code. We can walk through it a bit, nail it a little bit better. And of course, it can't just be super easy. There has to be some lifecycle methods. So every component, so the way React works, is every component has to have a render function, or else why are you making it? It's a view layer thing, so you don't have a render, that's the point of it. And so when you're rendering, the way it works is when something changes, it re-renders the whole component, kind of. I'm not going to get too in the weeds on it, but what it does is it has a diff algorithm that says, is it truly different this time than I updated it on? It doesn't do like dirty checking like Angular does, if you look familiar with Angular. It doesn't do that style. What it does is, it has its own version of the DOM, it's called the virtual DOM. It's the one on the slide. And it says, is anything different? Okay, this one little thing is different, I'm going to update it. Now there's hooks you can do to do different things. So when your component mounts the DOM, let's say you have some jQuery UI thing you want to run. One of the best parts of React for me has been I don't have to use jQuery anymore at all. I don't know the last time I was using jQuery for API calls. This is totally side off the topic of the screen, but so if you have things that need jQuery or you want to draw out a D3 chart, you can. But yeah, I don't use jQuery at all anymore. And it's really, like, I don't have to this weird DOM manipulation after the DOM's been rendered. All that stuff I don't have to worry about. jQuery code is always neat and pretty, I'm sure, but from what I see, it's a horrendous mess. All these like random click functions and on-change functions everywhere throughout your code. You can run it better, but most people don't. Any other things, like, if you want to like go through, so the diff algorithms, they have an expensive part to it. That's a diff. So is this thing different, this thing different? So there's hooks, you'd be like, if the object is different, don't even do the diff algorithm. So that's what some of these life cycles do. Again, you can look it up. I'm going to read off their website. But you can figure out what they need. Again, to start, you really don't need to know about them much to begin with. You worry about them as you get into it. For the most part, you're just going to need a render function, and that's pretty much it. Sometimes you'll need some on-change functions. Those are basic. They're just click functions. They're very basic. So you go back to it. All right, so you'd have in this other code section, it's kind of hard to fill out a code this line. You'd have what the on-change is. Basically, you're going to change the state of your filter text. Kind of thing. Very basic code. It's really just JavaScript with some weird HTML theme as JSX.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What can go back to the previous slide? What you mean by mounting a component? Oh, by the way, you have a typo on the second line.
Good. I was making sure someone caught it. If people watch me talk, I always leave spelling mistakes in there for people to catch to make sure they're paying attention. Yeah, if you use it with if you put a spelling mistake in it, it won't work. It doesn't work that way. So what's your question? Sorry. What do you mean by mounted? Okay.
Yeah.
So when you have a page, it's not a server-side rendered thing. client-side. All this stuff is client-side render unless you do server-side rendering, but let's keep that separate. So you have a client-side rendered thing. It's got to create the DOM. You got to mount it to. You got to point to the DOM and render it the first time. So when it mounts, you may want to do some things. If you have, like I said, a jQuery UI thing, you want to do a little widget thing that does all kinds of pretty cool stuff. When it's mounted, you then decorate it with that thing. You add that functionality if you want, or a D3 drawing, or something like that. Something that has its own kind of life cycle. So you have a table, you want to convert it into a data table. Like one of those jQuery data tables, you just say, find that DOM element, make it into a data table. Make sense?
Yep.
So prop types. So a component, it gets its data from its parent component. So it just kind of passes the data down. So React is what they call a one-way data flow. So it starts with your app component, the thing we saw at the beginning. It gets its data, and it'll pass it down all the way through. That's how it starts. Sometimes you need other components to have their own life cycle, to get their own information, but let's punt that for now. So you get props come down to components. What prop types are is the contract that prop has. So we have all these things now, where we have all these little minor reusable components now. Like before React, I would never make a reusable text box, right? But we actually have lots of reusable text boxes. Like we have different multi-selects. It just makes sense to make small little pieces of reusable code now. And what this does is creates the contract of what that expects. So when you're in dev mode, if you don't give this optional object with shape, a color property and a font size property matching those types, it's going to yell at you during, but it's only during dev time, so it gets rid of all this stuff when you're in release mode. And then you can pass function, you can do custom props. You're saying, whenever I get this property, it should look this way. You can do that stuff. So that's how data gets down from one component. So if you think of it, they're all kind of one giant component, one root node, and everything's underneath that root node. In one of the most recent versions of React, they had this idea of stateless components. I would say what 95% of your components have no state management in them. So no text boxes or filters or array manipulation. And then, so they realized that we have all these lifecycle hooks in the component that deal with state manipulation. And when state changes things, we render all that stuff. So one of the idea of a stateless component that is a pure function, and you pass things to it, it just renders it. That's its only reason for living. Anyone know what a pure function is? That wants to explain it? Someone? Come on, someone. Mark, why don't you explain what a pure function is?
So pure function is a function that has a predictable input with a predictable output with no type of mutation to it whatsoever. Has a known set of parameters and outputs the same result every single time.
Yes. So no side effects.
You get to keep your job.
Close enough. You get to keep your job.
$100
a year raise for you, sir. Yeah, so the pure function is I pass data to it, my data's safe. You're not going to do anything to my data, but you're going to do something and return something back to me usually. But no mutation of the object I gave you is going to change. You're just going to do something with it, maybe return me something that's a totally different object. But you're not going to affect the object I give you. How close is he? Pretty close, not bad.
Not bad.
Maybe $200 a year raise.
Nice.
Your wife would be so happy you come home. Honey, everything's changed. It's time to get the big house. Time to get the big house. So that's basically what it is. In general, in programming, again, this is not a React thing. Most of your functions you write should be that. Should have no side effects. And so most things are subjective. That's not subjective. That is an objective truth. Is make sure you don't mutate my array when I give it to you, please. Because I'm expecting it to be the same thing. So if we ever share an API, any of us, don't mutate my array unless you know, I know for sure you are. So how do you do that? So again, things get expensive. So you have like a 10,000 element array and you want to change one thing in it, you're going to give me a whole new array that gets expensive. So there's other ways to solve that problem. I'm not going to get into that. That's that immutable JS thing. Creating mutable data collections, but we won't get into that. But if it's an object, so object assign is, so I guess ES5 had it, but IE like 8 didn't support it well. Even though you can get a thing that gave you that ability, it didn't have what you want. So all it does is you get an object. So again, you pass in something. If it doesn't have the character I'm looking for, I just return the existing array. Didn't mutate it, nothing happened, nothing to see here, we're all good. If it did, if I do find it, I want to change it. So I want to update the character's favorite series. I want to update my favorite series for that character. Then I just, so people don't know, like, everyone understands like a JavaScript object is a dictionary. So this thing, it looks like you'll see the word characters, and updating the ID and everything. So all it is, think of it as a dictionary. So I'm creating a new dictionary of characters. I'm going to find, I got updated, my new updated character, yay, he's got his favorite series all set up. But I'm not affecting this thing. Because what object assign is, it's going to build this up to this point. So I'm saying I want a new object, that's all this says. It's empty, right? Empty object. I'm going to take this, whatever this object is at this reference point. So my dictionary of characters, at this character I need return him, and then this is find the property favorite series name. This is ES6 shortcut. Favorite series name, favorite series name, exact same thing. And say find that property in here. If it exists, use this one in here instead. So it's like, it works itself in. The further you're out is the source of truth. So as it moves up. So this thing will update that character, the favorite series name, and then returns a new object. Nothing is mutated along the path. Okay? Make sense? Good? Good. And then I do the same thing with the collection. Now again, if this is a giant collection, that could be costly. To update one property and give you a whole new collection. So that can be costly. So there's strategies to mitigate that. And there's immutable data objects that exist now. There's a JavaScript library for everything, and there's a couple that do that. Immutable.js is one of them that was created by the people at Facebook. So all this stuff, I probably didn't say it, but all this stuff is all Facebook stack software. Everything you're pretty much Babel, but React, Flux, all those things. So immutable is a thing that allows you to do state mutation on arrays and returning, it returns you a new object, but it mostly keeps everything the same. So it's performant. But for most things, that's not going to be a matter. That's not going to matter in your app. So again, try and be pure in your functions. Sometimes you have no choice, but make sure that's sometimes. Like regular mutations are very difficult to deal with. So that's a pure component. And actually, at work we use Airbnb's JS style guide. So anyone linting their JavaScript today? Come on. Oh my goodness.
Only when you tell me.
Anyone not linting their JavaScript today? That's how many hands I've lost. I've lost everybody but 2 people's hands. Okay, everyone put their hands up again. Let's start over again. Let's start over. So if you're not linting your code today, you need to be. Because especially if you do code reviews, you're going to be reviewing, hey, those should be 4 spaces on those tabs. Like, that's silly. But a good linter, so Airbnb published a style guide, you can use it, put it in your build pipeline, and as you're writing code, it's going to yell at you saying, hey, you're taking that parameter I passed in and mutating it. You're reassigning the parameter I passed in. Stuff like this. So it's not just style like spacing and commas. It's interesting, important stuff. I wanted to say is to not use an arrow function for this. This again is that arrow function thing. So again, when I say this, people in the React community guilty of showing too many things at once. That's not just React. I'm one of them right now. I totally realize this. It's fine. So this thing is, I don't need all those functions and those lifecycle hooks. I'm only responsible for rendering something. And then I have a callback function set as favorite series. And so I have these callback functions that do these things, but I'm still a pure thing. I have no state. I just call back to things that own me. That's it. Yeah, there's your prop types again. So how people use .bind when you have a function, then you want to add, I want to call this function, but I want this context to be this, or I want these parameters already passed to it when the person calls it. So in this situation, I'm creating this array of characters. I want to add this function, but I just want to be able to say add to favorite. I don't want to have the person to know what things to pass in. So instead of doing a bind, So all this is doing is returning a function. Okay? So basically it's like saying, return function add to favorite with character. I'll just return that. So it's returning a reference to a function. Okay? When you do a dot bind, so in React, since say you had an array of 100 things, if you did a dot bind, it would make a new function reference every time. Right? Just doing a dot bind, so you bind that previous parameter, you're doing that, and every time you render again, it's going to do it all over again. That's the whole point of bind. So this, you can just create a partial application. So it's a functional programming thing. If you don't understand, it's fine. Partial application, I'm going to partially apply the parameters to this function for you. So you don't have to know about every parameter that the function takes. You can be a lot simpler. Now, the weird CSS thing. So anyone not heard of BEM before? So I'm doing the reverse question. Okay. So everyone else heard BEM. Perfect. This is great. Let's move on. So CSS is. Try to come in or come on, bud. Come on in. If we're all learning about React, you're too late. We're talking about something else now. So again, if you're not doing React, you still have this problem with CSS. So there's things out there that kind of help, and you can do inline styles. Inline styles aren't performant. They have a real bad browser story right now. Another way is you're making all these nice reusable React components, but the CSS isn't reusable. You have order of precedence matters. You have everything's a global variable, right? That's the thing with CSS is I have a thing called, I don't know, container. There can be a million things creating a container with different CSS attributes. So you have this problem that you never know what the source of truth is. And this is one, it's all it is, it's not a library, so I'm not introducing a new library. It's just a naming standard for your CSS. So block ln modifier. So everything is a set, from this point you start off with a self-contained block. Let's say a button. Okay. So button, people just use btn, if you're using a bootstrap, you use like btn and btn success or whatever. You're assuming that someone's not going to make another btn and do something different. So you want to make sure, and if you move that around to another part of your app, you want to make sure it looks the same. But it may not, because it might be in another container that has a subclass that cascades down to button. So you just move it somewhere, all of a sudden your button changes now because it's in a different class div. Pain in the ass. That's a before and after. So SiteSearch is fine, but the word full. What does that even mean? It has no context. No context to the element you're in. You don't know what it stands for. You don't know if someone else, since it's global, someone else could have mutated that somewhere else. You move this search thing into a separate component, all of a sudden it totally changes the look and feel of the whole thing. It's not good, right? So you take the BEM approach. Looks weird and ugly, maybe. And if you like lots of dashes and underscores, then you love it. But it's effective. You know, if I pull this thing and put it somewhere else, it's going to be the same. Of course, someone could also make a separate SiteSearch component, but that's a lot less likely than someone making another thing called full. It's kind of weird, kind of different. But again, if you're not using React, this might be something that is very usable for you. So that's structure. So this thing, depending on your context, what your culture is, right, means red, yellow, green. We all know that's stop at the top one. There's some countries, they have it sideways. Then what does it mean? So things like this, to give you better structure, it makes it more clear what those things are. So that's what kind of BEM is trying to do. Make things more clear. Like, it gives you the context. It doesn't matter what your context is. This thing looks like this. And again, reusability. If you're making reusable components, you want your styles to come with it. And you don't want to do inline styles because you have to pay for those things, and then you have to argue with the UI person who cries whenever you say inline styles. You want to avoid that. So you want to be able to move things around and say, this thing what it looks like. This is the contract, this is what it looks like. Again, modularity. Kind of the same point. Modular is good. There may be times where you want things to look differently when you move to it. Maybe you want the button to look different in certain contexts. You're like, oh, it's annoying, I have to make another whole button thing. But you can just create another mutate of that button, mutate state of that button. Again, go back. You get, so this site search full, that's a modifier from Ben's perspective. That's a modifier saying, and then you can say green, site search, you wouldn't say green. You'd say something like success or something, right? You say site search success or something like that. So you can make it look different and still have all the other good things that come with it. No thanks. What do you think? Any thoughts on it? Weird, looks interesting, way too much work. Why is there so many names? I know it's very long naming, but unless you're really, like, I have had so much, even like Bootstrap, it doesn't, if you use like Bootstrap or Observe Foundation, it solves some problems, but it comes with others. And you still have this idea, you're still going to have to make your own classes. So some people actually have taken Bootstrap and then BAMified it. But there's other things, there's object, there's a few other paradigms that do the same kind of thing. And you can still use a less or a precompiler if you want to use variable name, like variable colors, and all those things that you can still share things. You don't have to like throw it all out. You don't want to have like color codes everywhere, right? It's annoying. But you just use less or SAS or whatever you want for that. And they have helpers too. They'll have helpers to help you build the syntax out. So there is that there. So you don't have to kind of throw all that away because that stuff really brings some benefit. They still kind of suck though, but never mind. So we have our components. They're looking hot. They look good. They feel good. Do they work? JavaScript, the community in general, they're coming along. We don't test a lot. We don't do a lot of unit testing. Because for a long time, it was a pain in the ass. It just sucked. The story was terrible. It's a weird browser page you have to go to. The person doesn't know to navigate to this URL. That's where your tests run. Right? And you like, get all this DOM. Usually if you're doing web stuff, you have a lot of DOM things. You have to like, okay, I don't want to worry with the DOM. I just want to test if this function works. And there's lots of stories out there. You have Jasmine, you have Mocha, you have all these great things. And tape is just another one. So it's a tap producing test harness. That's all it is. I have an example. We'll kind of break that in a little bit. Some of these testing frameworks, and they have lots of benefit to them too. We'll have like before each functions and all that stuff. They have these shared, so people who read a lot about unit testing is you know that your test should have a couple things. The one is each test should exist on its own. It shouldn't be affected by another test running before it. The problem is when you have shared state, that's not true. You can't be sure that, again, if you're not pure functions and all those great things, you can't be sure that your test is not going to be affected by a previous test because you're shared state. So in general, all your tests you write, unless there's a real performance penalty doing it, it's very rare I find, you shouldn't have to share state with another test method. Shouldn't have to. You shouldn't pollute your test with another test. Simple things. It sounds very authoritative. It is. Not kidding. Again, I think that's a good principle. So if you like the XUnit, Gerald Bozzaro says like the XUnit test patterns book is like this giant thing. I just use it to throw at my developers. You have quick reflexes, Mark. I haven't hit you yet with it.
Yeah.
So again, trying to share state. And a lot of these things, yeah, and like Mocha and these, you can opt out of these things to not share state. But again, you have to configure. I just want to configure stuff. I have enough new things I'm learning here. I don't want to spend like 3 weeks learning my test framework. That was my horse before I caught it and tamed it. It's way too scared. So you don't need a test harness. It produces a test editing protocol. You can run it without any test harness. You don't need a browser. You don't need you don't need headless browser. You need none of that stuff. Kind of like, again, it's not perfect. Like some of those things have nice syntactical sugar and really interesting things in them. And of course, JavaScript, right? So you have a million choices. I like the way that assertion happens. It's behavior driven. And then you're like, which assertion should I use? And you like sit there for 5 minutes wondering, what is the right assertion here? Like that should like who cares? It doesn't matter. Like if you have equal and deep equal, there's almost no reason to use a different assertion. Like there really is no difference. But these things like paralyze you with all these decisions. Yeah, it's not that perilous. Like, oh no, to make a decision. But in general, why? Why give you? I have to pick a framework that I got to pick up what assertion library I want. It's like too many things to think about. So mocking. Especially the front end world, a lot of our testers will mock something up, mock dependency or something. Mocking is a pain. So if I'm a C# and I see people writing unit tests for C# people here, and they're using a lot of mocking libraries. The problem is you're coupling yourself to the implementation of the thing you're testing. When all you really want to know is, if I give you these things, this is what should happen. That's all I care about. I don't care what thing you called how many times. So they seem like, make sure this method's called 2 times. If this method's called 2 times, then this method should be called 1 time. So you want to go refactor that code, oh shit, I'm going to change my test. I'm going to change my mocking and change my assertion. It's a pain. Why? Don't do it. Unless you have to, don't mock. Sometimes you don't have a choice. You have to mock things. Like those shoes. I do kind of like them in a way. Kind of. I was at a bar kind of restaurant in Kitchener, and I didn't know it was folk music night. For people who love folk music, I'm sure it's great. It's fantastic. But if you're not expecting a folk music night with amateur musicians, it can be a little painful. So I knew I was in trouble. There was a guy near the front of the stage. He was kind of, no one's dressed like a pirate in here, right? Okay. So he was dressed as a pirate. He had these like beautiful red moccasins, and I just saw this picture. And I was like, it brought back so many joyful memories for me. And like, people wear those things. I love hipsters. They're fun. I'm kind of one sometimes. So deep freeze. Again, purity. So the whole idea, I'm hammering it, right? Functions be pure, not affect state. What deep freeze allows you to do when you're writing unit tests is I'm going to say, here's my object, I'm going to pass it into my test method. I want to assure that this state is not going to change that method. It's an extra thing you verify in your test. What deep freeze does, so there's an object.freeze in JavaScript, but it doesn't if you have a nested object, it won't do it. It kind of sucks. So the library, no, another new library. What deep freeze that will do is it'll navigate through all your objects. So I pass this into this method. If it changes anything, it'll throw an exception. So you know, as an extra part of your test, you just freeze your objects and you make sure that state doesn't mutate. I really hate state mutation. I think I have a problem. It's the root of all evil, I think. So that's a unit test. You have one import, we're missing one import at the top, and then the file it's testing. Very simple, not much to it. Your cert just tells you your test method is done, that's all it's doing. So you create your object, your test object, and you're saying we're going to deep freeze this thing, so whatever I call this format character image URL, I'm asserting that it will not change. Nothing, even if it's a minor change or it barely doesn't change anything at all, I don't care. It should not change at all. You should not, even if you try to reassign it its own thing, it won't let you. You say you're expected, you say your actual, very convention based. I think most people already probably, maybe not, but people should use somewhat of a convention. When you're doing things, usually expected actual is the way that people do it. But you need different things, of course. That's our convention. So this is the expected thing, this is the actual thing, are they equal? Now, this thing is fine because it's a string, right? So it's immutable, so it's not a big deal. But if that's an object, you'd want to use a deep equal there because you want to make sure that, in fact, it probably should never be equal if it's an object because you should be creating a new one mostly. And so that should actually be a deep equal if it was an object. Do I have an example of that? No? Okay, cool. Yeah. Does that make sense? People write unit tests for JavaScript in here? Anyone? Kind of? Twinkling your fingers, does that mean kind of? Or you just not magic hands?
Well, for class.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's rare, I think. So you can you go to these, especially if you're creating an open source project, you really definitely should. But it's not, and I think it's rare. Well, okay. How many C# developers are in here? Okay. How many of you write unit tests for most of your code? Yes. So C# not that much better. It's easier to unit test in C# than in JavaScript, but that's pretty straightforward. Now, some people, like So you talk about test-driven development and all that stuff. You have arguments in different camps saying it's not that effective, it affects the state of your design too much. Again, you need to design. I'm not saying you have to do test-driven design or that. I'm not saying that. But if you're doing things, try and make your functions, if you go down this modular path, have a module that's just a function, and that's it. It's less things to work, and try to have as little dependencies as possible. I know, of course, right? It seems stupid to even say it. Because it makes testing way easier. And it also makes your code easier, and I think it really lowers the rates of bugs. There's some evidence, but most studies in that, how the hell do you study that? You're gonna take two developers, twins at birth, say you're gonna go down a path, you're gonna go down this path, right? You're both gonna use Golang, and this is you're gonna eat the same food, like you can never know. But my heart tells me it's true, so it must be true. So that's part of the code part, and then we'll look at some code. I'm talking of some actual code soon.
So this deep freeze is an API.
It's so it's a library. I'll show you it when I show you some code. It's just a dependency you add in your package.json for people who've done NPM. If you will not, I'll show you it. So what I'm going to do is all this code, I have a repo for it. I think Mark's made a change to the repo while I've been talking, right?
Oh yeah.
So I'll show you how you download it. You can run I have commands on the repo itself. If you want to install dependencies and actually run the app, make changes, go right ahead. It's all there for you. I'll show you in a minute. The last thing I'll leave you with before we look at the code, I'll come back and finish, is lint your code. So ESLint is so people have used linting in JavaScript, probably use like JSLint or JSCS, what was the original one? Anyways, doesn't really matter. So this one's really good because it's a programmable, it's easy to extend, and people are doing interesting things. Like I said, Airbnb is the one I use. I'll show you their style guide because it's really good. They actually explain why they make decisions. They'll have conversations to why they went a certain way, which is somewhat interesting sometimes. Sometimes it's like, it doesn't really matter if we just have to pick one, but that's most linting, I think, is just, it doesn't really matter whether it's 2 spaces, 4 spaces, or 20, okay, some things matter. I was throwing 20 spaces, but 2 spaces is better, but it doesn't matter. So just pick one and do it. And everyone do it the same team, your code reviews, you don't have to do it like, we have people like, oh, you have extra white space in your code, you have like, oh, who cares, it doesn't matter. So you do this stuff when you do code reviews, and I'm sure everyone's doing code reviews, right, when they write code? Of course we are. We never forget to submit for code review. You don't have to worry about those annoying things. It don't matter that much. You can focus on the design of the software, which is what they should be about. They shouldn't be about, oh, you missed a semicolon, or you should have an extra space around your parameter. All that garbage, that's useless. It doesn't matter. If you think it matters, it doesn't. Even if you still think it still doesn't. All right, let's see some code. Any questions before I show some code?
Can you change Babel with TypeScript?
Different things. So I don't think TypeScript is its own compiler. So it does its own thing compiled to JavaScript. So as far as I know, it doesn't. So TypeScript has some of its own next version ECMAScript stuff coming down the pipe, so that is a separate thing. That comes with what a poorly designed bathroom. Put a door on the damn thing. Horrible. Who designed that thing? Put your hand up. It's you. So they're different paradigms. So but people who see me talk the .NET when I did a talk on TypeScript, I'm no lover of TypeScript. I did a talk on TypeScript, and all I did was complain about TypeScript. It was great. If you want to learn about TypeScript, it's the wrong thing to come to. But I'm not. So there's problems there. To me, Babel is just like, I'm just going where JavaScript's going, and then it's going to deal with the browser stuff for me. So you can keep up to date. TypeScript's like a whole paradigm, like a separate paradigm you got to learn a bit. It's not bad or worse. It is, but it's not bad or worse. It's just different. So you're talking about static typing that TypeScript has. I hope, and it may happen, that you can kind of merge them together. So I like what Babel's doing with some of the next JavaScript stuff. And some people really like the type safety that keeps them safe at night. It's going to keep the burglars out. Type safety does not keep the burglars out. That's the short version of my talk about TypeScript. They can just break the window, okay? So don't worry about locking your door, okay? Lock your doors. Don't lock your doors. Why are you so scared? All right, let's see some code. Any more questions? Oh, I feel like I'm a short dude. All right, let's go on.
The latest version of TypeScript is providing like transpiler features. So you can write
You can do Babel. Okay, cool. Great. There you go.
like Babel.
Perfect. Exactly what I was waiting for.
I was hoping to change your mind.
No, Babel's good. I really like it. You don't need to do it.
This is not intended for children. It's just toys. Like what? You have to be 13 or older to for this program. I don't know.